everyone. My name's JJ. It's a pleasure to be here. We have 20 minutes, so we have a short time to speak about a deep theme, how to approach this to LATAM VC. We have three amazing individuals with a lot of experience and track record in different area codes. So first off, I would like to ask you, the three of you, what is the current narrative and what numbers are we seeing out of Latin America, and how do they compare to what you guys see in other parts of the world? We usually talk about like Latin American discounts when we look at companies, but how do you, through what lens do you analyze Latin America venture capital today from your angles? Maybe we begin here with Robert.
It's a tricky question because the real data you have is your own. And things of course are adjusting quickly, but I would say at the very early stages, you see very nice valuations in Latin America as opposed to the US, as opposed to Israel. We're a bit exposed and present in pretty broadly. So if Israel is 100, that may now be 90 or 80. The US may be about 50 for comparable situations or comparable teams for comparable ventures, and Latin America may be at 20. That said, very similar to Spain, by the way, I would say. That said, as ventures go forward and start building momentum, I think it gets pretty even.
Interesting, thanks. You continue.
Sure. So I think we're at one of the most exciting times to be in startups and venture in Latin America. 2021, I think, had more investments in Latin America than like the last 10 years combined in terms of capital deployed. We're starting to see unicorns all over, the region. 3 years ago, Mexico didn't even have a unicorn. Now they have 5 or 6. Same is happening in Brazil. Same is happening even here in Central America. I think it's a really exciting time in general. There was a bit of exuberance, I would say, in 2021, where we had a lot of startups get funded that hadn't really built a real business yet, right? Hadn't really found product market fit. And so we're seeing some of those companies start to stumble, but we're also seeing ones that had actually built real businesses, that actually had customers, had revenue, are being able to scale, are being able to raise up rounds. So there is a market correction, I think, that's taking place, where you see people kind of move towards quality, move towards real sustainable businesses, move towards kind of something that's more sustainable long term.
All right, thanks, Andrew.
I'm probably the contrarian here. I think everything here is overvalued by a lot. Like the thing you have to keep in context is that in the US, like in San Francisco where I'm at, we have 20 plus unicorns a year. Like we just have so many unicorns. So like the exit path for a company makes sense. So at a $20 million valuation or a 30, or I've even invested at a $100 million seed, if the market's big enough, we know it can get there. And that 100 million seed, by the way, is like crushing, but they could be the next Stripe. So my point is, here, you have all these companies, I think, that have this illusion that because a few of them got into YC, that they suddenly are all worth 10 to 20 million, and there's zero M&A activity that supports that. So when you go and look at what the exit scenarios look like for these companies, from a VC, we have to work backwards. We need outliers to win. We can't, most VCs, I won't speak for everybody, but most VCs are looking for that one portfolio company to be the Uber and return their entire fund. And that's really hard to do if you invest in all these companies at 20 million and they only return $200 million exits. And so until the M&A activity for the LATAM market is at a level that supports these higher valuations, it makes it really hard for these other investors from America or other places to come in and write the check. And I'm a 5-time founder. So from my perspective, like what I did in my last round, which we talked about off panel, was like, I intentionally set my valuation really low on my first round. I came in and said, in the US, everyone thought I was crazy. I did a 4 million valuation cap. We were 10x oversubscribed on the amount I wanted, and I just cherry picked every individual investor I wanted because I was thinking about building a team. How is that team going to help me in the next round? How is that team going to help me with commercial agreements? How is that team going to help me exit? And from that perspective, like, your investors are your team. And so if you're so focused on valuation, I think that you miss out on this huge opportunity to be the next great company because you didn't build the best players around you. And I think, like, from a LATAM perspective, I'm excited for this, change to occur, because the hardest thing, we look at hundreds of companies in LATAM, we've only made 3 investments where they were reasonable, where we thought the market could justify the potential exit value, and where they actually had traction that supported their valuation. So, I just think that once that happens, and if there's any founders in the room, just be realistic about, what is your market support for exits, and, be willing to take a dilution event. Don't be crazy and take like a 40% or something. Like, I just mean set your valuation reasonable and pick milestones that make sense, and then control your destiny. Because if you win, if you set those milestones up and you pass them, every VC will be excited to invest in you because they can see your path forward. I think you mentioned it earlier, like, basically investors invest in lines, not dots. So if we can see you win and we can see the traction, then it's a lot easier to keep backing you at way higher valuations because we have more confidence you'll be the outlier. Sorry, that was very long.
No, thanks a lot. That's so interesting. And one of the things we also discussed is geography, right? If you're a founder and you're building a company, it's, say, if we take out of Brazil and Mexico, we're left with a bunch of very small countries and markets. Maybe Colombia goes into big ones, but I mean, if you're a founder, I'm a big believer in first who, then what, but where, I guess, also matters, right? Because you're dealing with a lot of geographies and a lot of countries. If you want to scale, like if you do in the States, right? You have a huge market that you don't need to go to 10 countries to grow, right? So what do you think is needed, or what would be the approach a founder can take if you're in one of these small jurisdictions? How, from your perspective, what does it take to go big, right? Because it's what you're saying. You're not seeing those exits because it's hard, right? It's hard to scale in these latitudes. So, I mean, I open it to the 3 of you guys again. Ali.
So I think it really depends sector by sector. So, things that are traditionally just scalable, like software as a service, doesn't have that same scalability in Latin America because of the things that you mentioned, where you need to have separate, for example, something like payments, right? You have to have separate hookups in each country with the different banks, with the different partners. Whereas in the US, you can just hook up with JP Morgan or something and have it spread across the whole region. Whereas the things that are kind of more people intensive, right? Like ride hailing or food delivery apps, things like that, where either way you have to have people on the ground to different regions, different cities, and it doesn't really change the game plan, the fact that each country is different, because either way, you'd have to have a separate team in Austin and a separate team in Dallas and a separate team in New York, right? So I think it just depends on what kind of business you're actually trying to grow.
Right, thanks, Robert.
Yeah, agree with that. But also, cobbling, weaving these markets together creates opportunity. There's an opportunity many times to create a layer underneath those that need to think in terms of one integrated market. The example of Deal, for example, comes to mind, that helps you, and they just blossomed during the pandemic because they help you hire anywhere from anywhere, for instance. And this may be a little bit sort of sidestepping, but you also see some really interesting companies, very basically powered by Latin Americans. I'll mention one example, Desorio, fintech, optimizing working capital management. 2 Latin founders, US educated, US bred, YC, first round, in this case, not for, Madrona, etc. First phase, capturing dozens of emerging global tech players as customers, a big US bank as well, and then they relocate to Latin America, and they're at 70 now, I think. More than half are Latin America based. And hopefully sooner rather than later, Latin America is an important market. For now, there's too much growth, actually. So an example where a larger market is dictating things.
All right, thanks, Andrew. What is your take on it?
My background's in growth, so high iterative, fast testing, and lots of failing, basically 80% plus. I think that the LATAM market's interesting because everyone's trying to chase the bigger markets, and I actually think that some of all parts can be much stronger. So I actually believe kind of maybe the opposite, that starting a company in Guatemala can actually be your strength, and owning it here is your strength, and then going to like surrounding countries and building from there is a strength. And because no one else is there, like everyone's trying to focus on getting to Mexico or trying to focus on getting to the US, well, that means there's also a lot more competitors there. And I think going deep in your geographic region can be your strength. And I think that, and it allows you to compete, because once you're a large company and you have a large, backbone of financial stability, you can go into Mexico and play on the same court. And I think then, everything's level set. So I actually think people are quick to leave their region, and I think that region is actually quite possibly the most, biggest asset you have.
No, thanks. That's interesting points, and I wanted to add. We don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to add to that. What do you think is needed to 10x the potential that we have in LATAM? If you're a founder here, what do you see from your perspective? What are we missing? What do we need to work on as community, as a bigger ecosystem to actually start to see more unicorns and more people actually make it without having to go to the US? Where do you see that gap? Maybe Andrew, we start with you and come back.
I actually love this question. So I think it's not related to the company at all, but it's a cultural thing of sharing. I think what sets San Francisco apart from every other market, like if you go to LA, New York, no matter where you are, there's this like culture or ethos of collaboration. I remember once being in a coffee shop and I was like talking to a coworker about a data structure problem we were having. And someone in front of us in line turned around, his name's Ben, and he was the head of analytics for Pandora. And he said, actually, I know exactly how to solve that problem. And he grabbed a napkin and started drawing our data architectures for us. And he's like, let me connect you to 3 data scientists on my team to help your team fix this problem. There was no like, hey, you're gonna pay me. There's a consulting thing. None of that. Like everyone there is just there to help. And in other markets, it's often competitive, where I don't want to introduce like another company to a VC I'm talking to, because what if that VC picks that person over me? But in San Francisco, it's the opposite. It's like, I'm going to introduce you to 30 VCs that I'm talking to, because we should all win. And if he wins, he's going to know 30 more VCs to help me. And so I think the collaboration and that ethos of helping each other is the thing that's missing in most markets. And if you can build that here, I think you'll be so far ahead of everyone else. And that's just like a cultural thing that has nothing to do with the company.
Very interesting. Ali?
I think one of the big things is having people know what good looks like. I think part of the reason why some of these other areas have been successful is they had a couple of companies that were successful, and then people were able to take those patterns and bring them in and create that culture again and again, right? A lot of it just becomes, what's the recipe of a successful culture? So I think we're starting to see that, right? We're starting to see, Rappi and the Rappi Mafia, or Rappi Magic, whatever they call it now, right? That people learned what good looked like, and now you see people like going and reproducing that throughout the ecosystem, and multiple founders starting, right? So I think we start to see these initial breakthrough cases, whether it's Nubank, Rappi, across the ecosystem, and then the people that worked there can go and share their learnings across the greater part. And then I think part of it is also bringing more Latin people in the U.S. back here, right? I think a lot of people go to these great schools and then they stay there and they work at Uber or they work at Amazon or whatever, they don't come back. And so being able to bring more of those here to help out the ecosystem, I think is a great next step.
Thanks, Ali. Robert?
Yep, I'm going to repeat what Ali has said in slightly different words. I think the ice has been broken. So the mindset, you find the right mindset, the right playbooks almost anywhere. So the ice has been broken, and I think Latin America will develop faster than Israel developed, for instance, more quickly, more scale, better. And then the other element is this bringing the U.S. talent back to Latin America, but I see that slightly different. That is also an important dynamic. But Latin founders are starting sometimes in San Francisco, sometimes in Guatemala, sometimes in Colombia, with part of the team north of the border or farther south of the border. So I think in terms of, because I think in part you were asking about sort of building the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. The ecosystem, I think, has also gone well beyond borders. So your mindset should be, my ecosystem is, not just this particular city in Colombia, let's say. It's much broader than that.
Thanks, and you speak about mindset, and if I can put in my 2 cents on the subject also, we were discussing, before the panel, with mindset, I get to, in the past years, I've gotten to, mentor a lot of founders. And if you grab an Excel spreadsheet, you have 10 cases for 10 years, and you plot out what these founders project in, you can actually see with zeros the amplitude of their thoughts, right? Like, because you're seeing how big they can think, and you can see if they're, scared or not. And I do think that mindset, you're beginning to see it, but, you're scared of adding zeros to that spreadsheet, right? And think bigger, or, how to hack that growth, because maybe it's because we haven't seen those many examples near you that you can say, hey, that guy did it, I can do it too, right? But definitely, connections, these types of events help, meeting people that are doing it, and, you're like, well, he's also a guy or a girl just like me, and why couldn't we do it, right? But I do think, we still need to work on that. It's a spirit thing. It's a mind of how small or big you can think about it. And maybe, just last subject, what macro trends with regards to like markets, or, just what macro investment trends are you seeing in Latin America? What's coming out of Latin America right now? And perhaps what are you seeing in other spaces that, we might see? I think in Latin America, we usually see things have a lag from what you see in other more developed countries and markets. So where do you see that market? What's coming out of Latin America, and where do you see the next trends with regards to founders and investment? If you're a founder today, where can you get into that you're going to catch a wave? If you want, Robert, let's start with you, and we'll go that way.
Maybe the way I see it, there is just so much happening. The human capital, the initiative is bigger than any trends that you might see. We're fairly agnostic. We are very much who, and then the what and where are maybe tied, but they're very secondary. The what is basically about focus. The where, if it's the right mindset, the right team. That is, a little bit secondary. So agnostic, really. I'll think and see if I can come up with. I thought about it already, because of course you asked us to think about it, but I have no big macro trend right now.
Thanks, Ali.
So I think the thing that excites me about markets like LATAM, compared to something like the US, is in the US, all the entrepreneurs are solving problems for like the top 1% of people, and they're making life like 1% better. But in Latin America, there's this huge opportunity to serve 90% of the population and make their lives 300, 500, 1,000% better. There's just a lot of things that are broken, and that have actually already been solved, right? Like we see things that work in the US, that work in Europe, that work in Asia, just aren't here yet. And so, I think the thing that excites me is as more people travel, as the world gets smaller, more people go and get connected, being able to see things that are happening in these other markets and bring it here and have that history and have that path, right? So part of the reason why Rappi built a super app is they initially started with just one service, and then when they were in China, they saw what was happening with Didi, and they were like, okay, this makes sense that we can replicate this in Latin America. So I think the more we're open to ideas across the world and looking at it as kind of one giant test of what's happening all over, the problems are kind of the same, right? We have the same issues here that people have in the Philippines, that people have in Nigeria, that people have in India, right? It's the same things everywhere. Access to capital, trying to figure out how to buy a house, trying to figure out how to save, trying to figure out how to get a better job. These are problems that exist, right? And people that can go and find solutions that are already working and just replicate it, I think have a really great shot at making something meaningful.
Appreciate it. And last, Andrew.
It reminds me of like Uber would never work if you didn't have Google Maps first, right? And so there's a lot of infrastructure stuff that's just not here that doesn't allow you to do maybe the same types of businesses. That's why there's a lag. But I think people are scared to be a pirate. And in the Bay, we talk about this a lot. There's pirates and explorers. And an explorer is someone goes and makes something that's absolutely new, no one's ever heard of. And that's really hard. It takes a lot of education and changing behaviors. But it's okay to be a pirate. If you see something in a different region that works well and you have the ability to apply it in your region, it's okay to be a pirate first. Often it's easier. And you learn so much through that process that you're allowed to then be the explorer. And I think people are scared to be pirates because they feel like they want to create something new. Some of the biggest businesses in the world were pirates first and explorers second. And I think that if you think about it from that context, and if you're an entrepreneur in LATAM, you should be looking around and saying, what do we not have here that works somewhere else that I can pirate? Because I think that's your fastest way to winning.
One thing I would add is that in terms of a sort of general feeling, mindset type thing, is that I think in Latin America, we're starting to think in terms of the more chaos, the more opportunity. Where it used to be that, oh, this is too chaotic, this is, we're lacking infrastructure, we're lacking that, let's not try that here. Now it's the contrary. The more chaos, the more opportunity. And I think, we could come up with a bunch of examples in that regard. And I think that's a big shift. That's almost another ice broken, another kind of ice broken.
Well, that's thanks a lot for that. Those great interventions. I think we're out of time. I don't know if there's time for a question from the crowd or not, but I appreciate. It's a great honor to be, sitting here with you guys, and have a great rest of your volcano experience.
Thanks.